Do you ever have those nights where you're hit with like this fervor or that feeling of being obsessed beyond what a mortal brain can even fathom? Well, that was me in Warframe. I decided to get into the game because a buddy of mine introduced me to it. He told me about it at our lunch table in 7th grade, and I went home after school, booted up my Xbox in the living room, and immediately saw that the game was M-rated. To give some context, my parents had just gotten me the Xbox that past Christmas, and Forza Horizon, Subnautica, and Mirror's Edge were like the only 3 games living on there. The most I could really do for new games was renting Destiny 1 from my local library and would renew it as much as I could whenever I picked up new books every other week. So fast forward to the Xbox being moved down to the basement a couple of weeks later, and boom, Warframe in all its glory. Now back then, I remember it being this gritty, weird space game that let me be this badass space ninja. So that became my new interest. And once I got into the game, seeing my clunky starter frame standing next to my friend's decked out Frost Prime was surreal. My buddy had this auto rifle named the Soma, which fired off 200 rounds like the Heavy from Team Fortress 2, and would spool up to get even faster and faster. Seeing that gave me a brief glimpse at the endgame of Warframe, where everything lives by the rule of cool, and having the best fashion while committing genocide is the goal. Everything after that has been a dream. A second dream even. I'm not going to make any more of those throughout this video, I promise. This video isn't just a review, it's a reflection on the tangled, wonderful mess that is Warframe. You see, Warframe is a game of mass. Not just the literal kind, though there are plenty of those, but layers upon layers of complexity hidden beneath a sleek, fast-paced shooter. It's free to play, endlessly deep, and somehow one of the most incomprehensible experiences I've ever had booting up a game. It's an MMO that's not an MMO, a looter shooter that is packed to the brim with cool lore, and has onboarding that throws you off a cliff once you get started, and expects it to fly before reaching the bottom. Before any of this throws you off though, the game is a good bit better to make your way through nowadays, and the studio behind the game, Digital Extremes, is aware and trying to change that. I know the introduction of the game is getting a lot more streamlined, which is great, so keep that in mind. As for starting the game, you begin as one of the 3 starter frames. Warframes are these powerful biomechanical suits of armor controlled by the player, each with unique abilities and playstyles. Think of them like customizable characters or classes in other games, but way more dynamic. The starter frames are Excalibur, your classic warrior of the game, Mag, a spellcaster who works as Magneto from X-Men, and Volt. He was my personal starter and functions like a speedster light. These are all great oversimplifications of what the characters are, and that's the awesome part. All Warframes are structured the same in terms of their overall layout, but they come with a combination of 4 signature abilities plus a passive that define their combat style and are pretty distinct compared to the usual expected archetypes in MMOs. Once done playing through the introduction segment, there's a lot that will happen. This part I do need to be a little critical on, since it's been a good while since I've seen the game with fresh eyes. From memory and my personal experience, you're introduced to the origin system, which is a sprawling star chart with dozens of planets. And each has missions that unlock more missions, that unlock even more missions, and it kind of feels like opening a drawer and finding 10 more drawers inside, all locked with keys hidden in drawers you haven't found yet. Progression becomes a scavenger hunt across planets, menus, and eventually the Warframe wiki or YouTube. If you want to upgrade gear, you need credits, endo, mods, and maybe a small animal to sacrifice. Want to craft a new Warframe? You just need to find 4 blueprints across 4 different systems, wait about 72 hours for construction, and then you'll be allowed to have fun, of course. The initial gameplay loop was a little confusing off the bat, I'm not going to lie. I had the privilege of having a friend to play with and help me understand, and when I got friends to play way further down the line, I made a whole Discord channel with resources and guides to help visualize what I was explaining, since I'm not really the best at that. All this to say, you will get lost. Not metaphorically, literally. I mean, quite literally in the ship's UI. Quests will start, you'll kind of forget why, then you'll finish them by accident. Mods sound important, but the game explains them kind of like a riddle. The Codex is a lore tome pretending to be a user manual. YouTube will become your real tutorial, and eventually that'll lead you to the wiki, but once you endure this early chaos, things do start to click. You get stronger, missions feel a lot more smoother, you unlock movement tricks like bullet jumping and parkour wall gliding, your arsenal begins to expand, and suddenly Warframe feels like this power fantasy you were promised. But getting there, it's less a learning curve and more a learning cliff. And no one told you you're going to bring a climbing rope. The story in Warframe kind of starts like, well, it just starts. I believe that there isn't really a major plot beat until you reach Uranus, and while there are initial nodes, side quests, and open world missions, they don't really help explain what's going on necessarily. What they do help is create these great contained spaces that help flesh out the world of Warframe. To help with some of the initial lore points that lead us to Cetus being a location, it starts with the Orokin. These guys ruled the solar system, known in-game as the Origin System, and were basically just super advanced humans, and they kinda sucked, like a lot. The Ostrons were ruled under the Orokin Empire, and after a series of unfortunate events that are explained later in the game and kinda through the Codex and lore, the Ostrons ended up being self-governed. They go on to create the village market of Cetus, which is located next to the plains of Eidolon. In the market, you have a handful of people to trade with and interact with. You've got Konzu, who's your bounty giver and the chief elder of Cetus, Hawk, who is a blacksmith and vendor who helps create modular melee weapons, and while the system is a little dated due to Cetus being the oldest open world now, some of the weapons in here are still beyond powerful and fun to toy around with. This can be applied to most of the modular weapons you get introduced to, by the way, so keep that in mind. Old Man Soombot sells some mining related tools, gem cutting blueprints, as well as ones for metal alloys too. This helps take away from some of the monotony of usual Cetus activities, so it adds a little bit of variety to the gameplay loop. Fisher High Look sells some fishing equipment and bait, which helps you bolster the Warframe fish market while watching some slop on YouTube. And Master Tessonai is our beast handler that sells conservation equipment that's used to capture wildlife, as well as trading caged wildlife, and also some mods to help out your pets too. And finally, the Young Nakak. I don't know why exactly they're here. They were involved with a quest which was cool, and they kind of just sell some Grineer flares and carved Warframe masks. Overall though, this area serves as an intro to a bunch of different systems for the player to get involved with. From figuring out how to make pets work and trying to push you to get more involved with modding, and the bounty system, which ends up setting up for most of the hubs in the game. I primarily ended up staying here for a good bit of the early game, and I mean really early game, grinding out some gear and mods that upgrade my arsenal. But it definitely starts to feel a little drawn out after getting some of the bounty rewards, especially since they're RNG based. In addition to Cetus, we have two other open world locations which are laid out similarly, with traders and bounties, along with separate distinct narratives that drive different parts of the overall story. Fortuna is awesome for the vibes. It has the best song in the game in my opinion. That's my personal opinion though. And not so much the progression from my personal experience though, is the one thing that wasn't too fun. And Deimos has an awesome environment as well as story that begins to lay out exactly what Warframes are. From here on out, some spoilers are going to come into play regarding what players learn about the game's story. I'll go ahead and put a skip timer here to help with it since there are major spoilers ahead for this section. And alright. We start with the Awakening, which begins to weave the narrative of the Orokin creating the sentience to help with colonization of a different system, but that backfired. The sentients then turned on them and claimed the different system, the Tau system, for themselves, with their leader being Hun Hao and his daughter being the Ta. Keep that in mind for later. The Orokin then stumbled upon the infestation and tried to turn that into a weapon, which shockingly also backfired. But out of that disaster came the Warframe suits, a blend of infestation, control, and something a little too alive. So, quick break from the lore dump. My buddy who had got me to Warframe then invited me out to come with him to go to TennoCon in 2018, and the entire thing was insane. Waking up that morning, when we got there, I saw a Herald cosplayer in the elevator, which was cool as hell. I got to watch Fortuna get revealed live, and I also have this one moment that's still burned into my brain. My buddy's wearing a pair of Bucciarati Vans, and for those of you that don't know, Bucciarati's from JoJo. And while we're getting our event passports stamped through an activity that they're running for that day, we bump into Rebecca Ford. Rebecca is a developer at Digital Extremes, and she was wearing a pair of Dio's pants, who is also from JoJo. And she actually did the pose, which was insane. I loved it, every single second of it. It was great, it was amazing. So of course you can fast forward a little bit from there, and school started back up, you know, Forsaken dropped in Destiny 2, and I kind of disappeared for a little bit. When I finally came back to Warframe about 2 years later, a different friend of mine was looking to start it back up, and I had this new gaming laptop that I just worked for, so we dove in. I didn't really jump into the story right away, and it honestly took another year, I know, another year, before I finally sat down and played the second dream. All I've got to say is, holy shit. It feels like watching a puzzle piece click into place that has just been sitting out of my view the whole time. I'm not gonna go deep into there because honestly, it's the turning point. It's almost like a rite of passage, and it's kind of the moment where Warframe goes from being this cool ninja loot game to, oh, this is personal. That revelation starts to set the stage for The Sacrifice, which closes out Arc 2. I wasn't around when the update originally dropped, but it still hit me like a truck. Right before that came Chains of Harrow, which for the record, terrified the crap out of me.
Rap, tap, tap.
But The Sacrifice, one word: visceral. Maybe two, visceral and gross. This is where I meet Ballas, or Ballas as I like to call him, depending on how spicy you're feeling. And things start spiraling. The aesthetics, the sound design, the body horror, it all gets under your skin in a way that Warframe hadn't done before. Coming back to the game after a long break like that, this one really shook me. Not in a wow cool kind of twist like the second dream. This one was on a deeper level. You start asking yourself, who's really in control here? The Warframes aren't just suits. They're someone trapped. And they're being controlled by you. Except you're also not even fully sure who you are. The whole thing kind of triggers this uncanny valley response where something human is the feeling that you're getting, but it's just not quite right. You feel empathy, but also discomfort. You're disturbed, but you don't want to look away. It's the kind of narrative that pokes at your moral compass. Were you ever the good guy? Did you choose this? Did they? The Sacrifice doesn't just expand the lore, it forces you to sit down with the consequences of power and control. And because I came in late, I didn't have the slow emotional burn that veteran players did. I just dropped right in, and the whiplash was real. It was like booting up a game and accidentally scheduling a surprise therapy session with Ballas as your unlicensed, emotionally abusive counselor. After the sacrifice, I kind of just sat with it for a while. It's one of those quests where even after it's over, it isn't over. Like your brain is still chewing on it days later. I started questioning how deep this rabbit hole actually went, because clearly, Warframe wasn't just throwing cool lore at the wall. It was laying track for something big. And that something big eventually became the new war. But before we even get there, the game drops a few smaller pieces, like the prelude to war. Actually, there was an even bigger piece, like getting my railjack. That was cool. Cephalon was cool. I played a good bit after railjack drops, so I didn't have to deal with the release of it. Yeah. The Necromech though, I am not going to lie. Instead of farming plat like I later came to find out, I decided to grind all the components and the Necromech. Let me remind you, I am just starting college at this time. I'm a freshman. This was truly a questionable moment for me, but in hindsight I don't really regret it. I met a good friend of mine through another great friend of mine. He was Brazilian and cool, and soon enough I got me a couple of his friends that also played Warframe, and that's when the game starts to really click for me. They invited me to their in-game clan, and that was kind of that. I learned a good bit of Warframe, up until one of them asked me if I had done The new war began with smaller missions to help set up the story. These aren't your typical filler, like Naruto episodes that you don't want to watch or anything like that. They're more like slow burns that give you perspective. You gotta play as some of the other faction. Like for instance, I played as Call, who was awesome, and seeing what the Greniers see was actually really horrifying. Playing as Viso, was even more fun, especially with a callback to one of the first bosses you face, the Jackal. And finally, Teshin, the stoic one-liner Dax soldier who gets quite the head injury. All this to point out that you're not some overpowered space god anymore. You're vulnerable. You die. It's humbling. It strips away the safety net that Warframe had built over hundreds of hours. It was a reminder that this universe is brutal, indifferent, and about to collapse under the weight of everything that's been brewing. And then, the new war hits. This is where Warframe goes full opera mode. We're talking betrayal, body horror, existential dread, and a sense of scale the game has only hinted at before. The Lotus, who's been this calming, mysterious presence, is suddenly fractured, literally. You're forced to confront her as Nata, Margulis, Lotus, and something else entirely. And that confrontation is more emotional than expected. You're not just saving the world, you're trying to figure out who this person is and what you are to her. A weapon? A child? A mistake? And I do want to point out that the period of time that people are waiting for the new war to come out was definitely longer than most people are used to. DE really put their back into this update. And even though I was playing it in a more fairly recent setting, it was a game changer. I mean it. And the entire story is very heavy on this idea of identity disintegration. Everyone's being pulled apart. Teshin, the Lotus, even you. The new war is less about stopping an invasion and more about piecing yourself back together. And just when you think you've got a grip on everything, boom. Warframe yanks the rug out again with the Duviri paradox. And let me tell you, Duviri is different. It's surreal, circular, and intentionally disorienting. You play as the Drifter, another version of the Operator, and you're stuck in this recursive, color-shifting timeline that feels like someone mashed up a dream journal with a philosophy textbook. And yeah, the gameplay is definitely a little weird at first, but there's something strangely calming about it. The pacing, the narration, even the absurdity. It's Warframe flipped inside out. It kind of reminded me of that feeling when you're having a dream where you know who you are, but none of it makes sense. And that's okay. Like you're allowed to exist, even if it's all just a little broken. Duviri doesn't raise the stakes so much as it more bends the rules of what Warframe is. It's not about killing the biggest thing anymore, it's about surviving long enough to understand yourself, or at least accept the version of you that wakes up each time the loop resets. And while it was cool, it was definitely a little confusing initially with the whole eternalism thing, and let's not get into that for now. So yeah, where does that leave us? For the awakening to the sacrifice, through the new war, and into the recursive weirdness of Duviri, Warframe's story isn't just a good for a free-to-play game. It's something else entirely. It's layered, personal, sometimes a little confusing, often existential, but always rewarding. And coming back to it after years away, honestly, it felt like revisiting a memory you're not sure actually happened. Everything's familiar but not quite the same. You remember what the Lotus was but not who she is now. You remember being powerful, but you're not sure if you earned it. And I think that's what Warframe's story does best. It asks questions that don't always have answers. About identity, about control, about the purpose. It's less about you saving the world and more about understanding your place in one that constantly shifts underneath you. Not to rapid fire this at you now, in case it's starting to draw a little long, but we have the part of the game that makes up the current arc that is wrapping up and setting up for the possible venturing into the Tau Ceti system, we hope. We have Angels of Zariman, which is all about grief, detachment, and confronting your childhood trauma in a spaceship that is a metaphor for disassociation. Jade Shadows hits just as hard with identity loss, betrayal. There is a pregnant Warframe and Stalker. This dude that's been hunting us down, but we work stuff out with, just turns out to be a chill dad. The quest is really awesome and heartbreaking, with the lore of the Stalker, who was a low guardian called Soren, and his lover Jade, and how Ball-ass ruined it back when the Orokin era came in. Then 1999 comes in like, have you tried hitting the timeline with a power cord and some unresolved emotional baggage? And yet somehow it still works. Because all of it, loops back to one man, Albrecht Entradi, the Void's favorite mad scientist. Part genius, part prophet, and part foreshadower of mods dropping in platinum. His legacy ties to every piece of the Void War saga and brings it all together. The Zariman, the Warframes, the Drifter, and even the weird calendar glitch that is 1999. And that's Warframe in a nutshell. But alright, that's enough for the narrative deep dive. It's really cool. Check it out. It's really awesome and the journey is really, really rewarding. I would highly recommend it. Now though, let's talk gameplay. Because while the story is what pulled me back in, the systems are what kept me playing. And Warframe's gameplay, it's a chaotic, over-the-top ballet of destruction that somehow feels both overwhelming and completely intuitive once it clicks. At this point, I landed myself about 1,000 hours on the game, and the remaining 600 didn't come from nowhere. The gameplay in Warframe is like nothing else on the market, and the reason for that? Movement. Now when most people hear movement, they think slide canceling in Call of Duty, or b-hopping in games like CSGO, or yeah, no, it was Timefall for me. I ended up playing a lot of Timefall. Anyway, that's usually the expectation. But Warframe, the movement here is just different. You start off as a baby Tenno, awkwardly hopping around, and then one day you're sprinting up walls, flying through the air, chaining slides into bullet jumps, and you realize you're becoming a blur, a parkour powerhouse. And that's just the thing. Warframe's movement isn't just fast, it's addictive. Chained together sprints, rolls, slides, and bullet jumps isn't just for show. It makes traversal feel fluid, and turns short missions into a race to extraction. Honestly, it's on par with games that got me hooked on parkour in the first place, like Mirror's Edge, Dying Light, and most recently, Haste. After a while, trying other games just feels slow. What isn't slow though is Warframe's arsenal. This is where your progression lives. Custom loadouts, weapon mods, and of course the drift. You definitely gotta look good while wiping out entire factions. Now keep in mind, there are about 598 weapons, including their different variations in the game, and one could argue they're all viable to an extent. Once you've got your loadout ready, It's off to the star chart to cause chaos. You want to be a stealthy space ninja and assassinate targets from the shadows? Easy. Want to blow up everything in sight as a cool bird lady who turns invisible mid-carnage? Go for it. Or maybe even prefer to kick back and fire down a hallway with a beam at enemies in a classic horde shooter fashion. You're pretty covered. The game doesn't really pressure you to experiment, at least in the usual way you would think. XP, or Mastery Rank, gives you a reason to try new things, and at the same time, you're still allowed to just vibe with a Warframe because the lore hits, or the playstyle's fun. For me, that frame is Baruch. How I ended up maining Baruch is a bit of a journey, but hey, definitely worth it. It started with me watching a video about him. He's this monk-like pacifist who holds back until he's had enough, and then just snaps, turns into a whirlwind of devastating punches. Sounded sick. So I built him the best I could, and with what I knew at the time, and the build came out okay. On a random night after work, I stumbled onto a livestream of a Warframe YouTuber that I enjoyed watching, Nova Umbral. He was breaking down in-game systems and talking about what it means to be a knower, which is a meme term for understanding the intricacies of the game. That then led to me DMing him on Discord, which led to a server invite, some helpful conversations, and eventually, a Baruch guide that broke down his entire kit for me like I was 5. Foolproof, really. The entire process had me talking with different content creators, and I even got help from a build crafter who was behind most of the builds that got me through the early game. From there, I put together a build with the help of the Warframe community, and suddenly I was unstoppable. Shotgun synergy to boost my melee, a backup secondary to bail me out, and a utility melee that made me even faster. It all just clicked, and all that sparked by a single Discord DM. That's the thing, Warframe's community is ridiculously welcoming. I never felt gatekept or judged, even as someone coming back after a long break. Whether it was Discord servers or YouTube comments, people were just chill, helpful, and that rubbed off on me. Now I've got a little knowledge of my own to share, and a few build crafting ideas to cook up and pass on. Now, as much as I love this game, I'd be lying if I said the systems weren't a lot. You've got weapons, frames, mods, arcanes, focus schools, intrinsics, Helminth, Railjack, Archon shards, and one day you then stumble across something like Zada's Whisper, and your brain just flatlines. You open the wiki, read the first line, applies void damage to all of the player's weapons. Okay, cool, sounds simple. Then you scroll down and realize it interacts with status procs, beam weapons, multi-shot, has a hidden mechanic where the void version of your bullets become a metaphysical ghost that may or may not ignore armor, depending on how well the server slept that day. It's like ordering a sandwich and getting handed a blueprint, a history lesson, and a side of theoretical physics. And look, I'm not mad about it, but it is the kind of game where sometimes you spend 20 minutes in the arsenal trying to figure out why your damage numbers feel off, only to learn that you forgot to format your secondary weapon's aura polarity, and then slot into the wrong slot to begin with. This is where the Warframe wiki becomes your second brain, or third, or like that one cousin who's not quite wrong, but makes things harder to explain. To their credit though, Digital Extremes knows this. The devs are weirdly aware of how complicated their game is, and they try to meet players halfway. Whether it's through the dev streams, patch notes, or casual Twitter replies, they do make a real effort to keep the community informed. Even if you don't always understand what's going on, you rarely feel left in the dark. The transparency helps. It reminds you that yeah, the systems are dense, but they're not maliciously dense. They just grew out of a decade's worth of spaghetti code and feature creep, which, let's be honest, is kind of impressive in its own way. So yeah, Warframe's a little deep. Sometimes too deep, but at the end of the day, I'd rather be overwhelmed by the possibility than being bored by repetition. If you made it to the end of this, I owe you a Ribbon mod, unrolled, for like a Torrid or something cool. Don't get into Ribbon rerolling. It will take a hold of you. Yeah.